Brutal message from Lewis Hamilton to Leclerc after the end of the Silverstone Grand Prix leaves Ferrari in shock. Stay until the end only if you want to see Charles Leclerc's fierce reaction to Hamilton's anger. It wasn't the trophy gleaming beneath the lights, nor the flags flapping triumphantly in the breeze atop the Silverstone podium, that truly unraveled the essence of what transpired on that turbulent afternoon. It wasn't in the rehearsed gestures, the national anthem echoing across the circuit, or the cameras capturing champagne-filled celebration shots for headlines and highlight reels. The real drama, the one that would be remembered not for its spectacle but for its substance, unfolded in the shadows of storm clouds, inside the cockpits of two identical red beasts, in the unscripted moments that separated instinct from indecision. It lived in the crackle of radio transmissions distorted by rain and static, in the tension hiding between silence and speech, in the urgency of a decision that could not afford to be delayed. While millions watched the surface, the podium, the press, the pageantry, those paying closer attention heard the heartbeat of the race echo through two voices. One searching, the other commanding. One lost, the other found. Inside the Ferrari garage, two world-class athletes sat behind nearly identical machines, engines humming with potential, tire compounds set to react to the elements, aerodynamics crafted for perfection. From the outside, there was symmetry. The same chassis. The same strategy briefings. The same real-time weather data. The same tools to fight the elements. But the storm, in its unrelenting fury, was not interested in symmetry. The storm demanded judgment, boldness, and the courage to act before knowing. As the dark clouds began to churn and the first drops of rain turned drizzle into deluge, the circuit morphed into something far less predictable, far more treacherous. The grip levels plummeted. Dry lines vanished. And suddenly, what had started as a race became a test of nerve. Charles Leclerc, brilliant, fast, immensely talented, found himself second-guessing. He felt the car slipping, but instead of acting, he waited. His voice came through the team radio, not with assertion, but with uncertainty. What are we doing? For words, seemingly simple, but packed with hesitation. Words that hung in the air, not like a question, but like a flare of doubt. Words that revealed a man searching for guidance in the fog. He didn't just ask once, he asked again. He hovered in the uncomfortable gray space between action and inaction, trying to balance feel and forecast. But while he waited, the track betrayed him. His slick tires, still gripping to the memory of a dry lap, became a liability. His pace dropped. His rhythm shattered. His strategy unraveled. On the opposite end of the garage, Lewis Hamilton was experiencing the same conditions, the same rain, the same information. But his response was born not from fear, but from feel. He didn't reach for the radio in panic. He didn't poll his engineers for options. He didn't seek clarity from charts or radar maps. He made a decision. Fast. Final. Clear. Box. Intermediates. Now. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command delivered not with ego, but with the certainty of a man who has faced chaos before and knows exactly when to strike. His tone wasn't urgent, it was controlled. His voice didn't spike with anxiety, it sliced through the storm with purpose. There was no second guessing, no searching for consensus. He had already made up his mind. The pit crew didn't hesitate. They didn't need a second confirmation. They didn't wait for further instructions. They moved as one, galvanized by what they'd heard: decisiveness, certainty, leadership. Hamilton dove into the pit lane at precisely the right moment, tires swapped with ruthless efficiency, and re-emerged onto the soaked battlefield not as a man trying to survive the rain, but as a man ready to conquer it. As others tiptoed through the wet, unsure of where the grip began and ended, Hamilton seemed to find rhythm. His car glided where others skated. He carved through the water with balance, intuition, and timing that seemed almost supernatural. Each lap that followed felt like a declaration, not of speed, but of presence. While Leclerc's race drifted into obscurity, tangled in hesitation and lost opportunities, Hamilton's race came alive. The stopwatch began to tell a new story. The gaps to the cars ahead shrank. He was no longer reacting to conditions, he was dictating them. While others adjusted, Hamilton adapted. While others doubted, he delivered. He wasn't just driving fast, he was driving with intention, with composure, with a kind of focus that turns a slippery circuit into a proving ground. His moves weren't wild, they were calculated. His overtakes weren't lucky, they were earned. He hunted. He attacked. He advanced. Meanwhile, the other Ferrari fell further behind. Leclerc, stranded on the wrong tire at the wrong moment, lacked the inner defiance to override the pit wall. The feedback loop continued, driver unsure, team hesitant, strategy broken. Lap after lap, he fell deeper into the fog, literally and metaphorically. From the outside, it was painful to watch. A driver of his skill, his pedigree, reduced to chasing shadows and reacting to decisions already made too late. The contrast with his teammate became unavoidable. Same car, same setup, same rain. But one took ownership. The other looked for someone else to lead. Hamilton wasn't racing the weather. He was using it. The water didn't slow him down, it amplified him. As others lost traction, he gained momentum. As visibility dropped, his confidence rose. The spray that blinded others seemed to part in front of him. Every corner became an opportunity, not a threat. Every sector became a canvas for brilliance. The lap times continued to fall. P10 became P8, then P6, then P4. He was closing in on the podium with surgical precision, not recklessly, not emotionally, but with the cold, calculated mindset of a predator that smells weakness ahead. It wasn't desperate, it was inevitable. By the time the checkered flag fell, the numbers read fourth place, but those numbers couldn't capture what had happened. They couldn't explain the presence he projected, the authority he asserted, or the respect he demanded, not just from rivals, but from his own team, who responded to his leadership as much as to his speed. The radio didn't carry panic. It carried poise. His drive wasn't loud. It was louder than loud. It was unforgettable. Leclerc? He finished P14, outside the points, outside the story, outside the moment. And that's where the deeper truth of Silverstone revealed itself. This wasn't about machinery. This wasn't about data. This wasn't about weather. This was about instinct. About courage. About who you are when the lights go out and the storm moves in. One man waited for answers. The other became the answer. And that's the difference that defines champions. It's not in the qualifying lap. It's not in the interviews. It's not even in the trophy. It's in those messy, chaotic, rain-soaked moments when everything is unclear, when you have to choose. When fear whispers and instinct roars. When you don't have time to think, only time to feel. When you either trust yourself, or you don't. Lewis Hamilton did more than just drive that Ferrari to the front. He reminded everyone, fans, critics, engineers, rivals, why greatness is never about conditions. It's about conviction. And in that storm, when even the bold faltered, Hamilton didn't just survive. He led. What unfolded during that crucial sequence of the race wasn't simply a matter of optimal tire selection or fortunate timing. It went far beyond pit lane precision or race engineer calculations. What truly emerged from that exact electrified moment was the rebirth of a driver fully immersed in the art of racing, a man no longer competing against others, but harmonizing with the circuit itself. As if the track was an extension of his consciousness, every corner became a note, every braking zone a pause in rhythm, and every acceleration point a crescendo in a composition that only he could hear. Hamilton wasn't just on a new set of tires, he was on another level entirely. The wet surface didn't neutralize his advantage. It amplified it. It unlocked the full spectrum of his racing soul. As the rain intensified and Silverstone's historic layout turned into a slippery minefield of risk and unpredictability, Hamilton emerged not just as a contender, but as a conductor of chaos, orchestrating his moves with razor-sharp clarity. Each twitch of the steering wheel, each calculated lift of the throttle, each split-second modulation of brake pressure was executed with precision that defied the conditions. He wasn't reacting. He was reading. Reading the track. Reading the grip. Reading the storm. While others tiptoed through corners like hostages to uncertainty, Hamilton glided, calm, assertive, with an inner compass calibrated by decades of mastery. It looked effortless, but that illusion was built on a foundation of immeasurable experience, sharpened instincts, and battle scars earned through countless duels in the wet. He didn't merely return to the circuit, he stamped himself onto it. Every lap he completed was a declaration, a statement of presence that reverberated through the paddock, the garages, and even the broadcast rooms. You could feel it in the tone of the commentators, in the gasps of the crowd, in the stunned silence on the Ferrari pit wall. There was no overdriving, no desperation, no frantic lunges. Just control. Poise. Authority. It was a kind of driving that wasn't loud, but still deafening. It spoke not in shouts but in certainty. Hamilton didn't demand attention. He commanded it with elegance that no telemetry could fully capture. As he surged forward, corner after corner, lap after lap, he didn't just cut through the pack. He rose above it. Competitors in superior positions saw his number in their mirrors, and they knew this was inevitable. Not a question of if, only when. And when he picked them off, one by one, it wasn't with brute force. It was with surgical grace. His pace was relentless, but his movements were composed, like a chess grandmaster dismantling his opponent's defense piece by piece. Never rushed, always 2 moves ahead. And all of this was done while navigating a damp, low-visibility battlefield that left others spinning, locking up, or paralyzed in strategic confusion. By the time the checkered flag came down, Hamilton had clawed his way up to 4th place. Not through luck, not through accidents ahead, but by methodical, controlled, ruthless execution. He chased down those ahead not with reckless ambition, but with relentless clarity. Every overtake was clean, calculated, and cruelly efficient. There was no wasted motion. No second guessing. Just the purest expression of racecraft delivered under the worst possible circumstances. Meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, Charles Leclerc, once the Prince of Ferrari, once the favorite son of Maranello, found himself not just out of contention but erased from the conversation entirely. Lapped. Lost. Stranded in a lonely, ghostly P14, searching not just for grip but for meaning. His tires offered no answers. His steering wheel gave no feedback. The balance was gone, but more damagingly, so was the conviction. His radio was filled with uncertainty, his lines were hesitant, his energy deflated. While Hamilton carved his way into the heart of the race, Leclerc vanished, physically, strategically, emotionally. But the true divide between them was never just about track position. It wasn't about who pitted on lap X or who undercut whom. It wasn't even about raw lap times or pit wall instructions. The gap between them, immense, painful, glaring, was a gap in leadership, initiative, ownership. The chasm was carved by the ability to rise when the world is spinning, to take control when no one else can, and to write your own outcome when the script has gone soggy in the rain. In that defining stretch, when the entire Ferrari operation slipped into analysis paralysis, when the radar screens gave mixed signals and the engineers clashed over what to do next, Hamilton didn't wait. He didn't pause. He didn't ask. He simply acted. He operated with a presence so powerful that it rendered everyone else passive by comparison. While the red cars struggled to translate data into decisions, Hamilton became the decision. His silence on the radio wasn't emptiness, it was confidence. There is a type of leadership that comes from seniority, from experience, from contracts and titles. But there is another, more visceral type, the kind that is seized, not granted. It doesn't care about how long you've been in the team. It doesn't care how many years you've worn the colors. It only respects performance under fire. And on that soaked British afternoon, under the weight of expectation and swirling uncertainty, Hamilton didn't just perform. He transcended. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw his weight around. He didn't need to shout for control. He embodied it. Fully. Completely. Quietly. And that silence was more commanding than any team briefing or motivational speech. He didn't ask Ferrari to make him a leader. He didn't need to be named the number one. He didn't wait for a strategic call to validate his instincts. He just went out and took it. He took the authority, took the responsibility, took the outcome, and owned every inch of it. It was the kind of performance that echoes across walls and decades. The kind that young drivers will study in film sessions. The kind that teams will point to in meetings about mentality, resilience, and execution under pressure. It wasn't just racing. It was a manifesto for what greatness looks like when everything is falling apart. And it proved yet again that Lewis Hamilton isn't just a master of speed, he's a master of moments. Because in Formula One, the stopwatch measures time, but it doesn't measure impact. The leaderboard ranks positions, but it doesn't capture command. And on that day, in that storm, at that track, Hamilton didn't just race Silverstone. He engraved himself into its legend. The turning point didn't arrive in a blaze of wheel-to-wheel combat, in a desperate lunge into a braking zone, or in a cloud of carbon fiber and flying gravel. There was no explosion of sparks or thunder of roaring crowds. It came silently, invisibly, like the brush of a cold wind before the thunderclap. Lap 13. Barely past the quarter mark of the race. The rain had begun to flirt with the edges of chaos. The surface of the circuit at Silverstone was beginning to lose its memory of grip. Puddles formed where they hadn't been a lap before. Visibility was shrinking. The clouds were thickening, not just above the circuit, but inside the command centers of every team. Ferrari's exquisitely detailed weather modeling system, which triangulates live Doppler radar inputs with trackside atmospheric data and historical wetline patterns from hundreds of previous sessions, faltered. Not by breaking down, but by becoming indecisive. It didn't scream. It whispered in static. The figures on the engineers' monitors hesitated, failed to confirm. The numbers didn't tell them no, but they didn't say yes either. And that ambiguity, that paralysis, created a crack. Hamilton didn't need data to speak. He could feel the answer in the curvature of his steering inputs, in the way the rear of the car subtly protested on exit. He read the changes not in charts, but in tension. Tension in the track. Tension in the air. Tension in his hands. He felt the temperature drop by a single breath of wind before cops. He noticed the hint of wheel spin in fourth gear through farm. He adjusted, not with hesitation, not with panic, but with precision. Brake balance slightly forward into Brooklands. A delicate feather of throttle out of Luffield. Nothing wild. Nothing obvious. But everything deliberate. There was no radio drama. No raised voice. Just Lewis Hamilton doing what only he can do, reading a race not through instruments, but through instinct. While Ferrari's software hesitated and engineers scrambled to reconcile probability with risk, Hamilton made the call. Internally, he didn't wait for the question. He gave himself the answer. A decision formed in the clarity of experience and delivered in silence. 2 laps ahead of anyone else. He was already preparing mentally for intermediates before anyone admitted the dry tire had overstayed its welcome. He had already changed the race before the strategists even realized it had changed. His early pit call was not requested with urgency. It was spoken with certainty. Box. That was all. It wasn't a request for guidance. It was a command to execute. A formality. That single move, that seemingly small act of self-trust, earned him nearly 5 seconds over Charles Leclerc. Not through pace. Not through luck. But through the ancient racing art of reading the invisible. Through being present. Completely, overwhelmingly present. That kind of presence, the kind that strips away noise and reveals only clarity, is rare. Hamilton didn't need Ferrari's command center to calculate optimal crossover points. He was the crossover point. He became the signal in a sea of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Leclerc, immensely talented, devastatingly fast in ideal conditions, was trapped in the fog. Not literal fog, but mental fog. Spray from the cars ahead blurred his vision, but it was the lack of confidence that truly blinded him. He was left waiting for permission in a race that wasn't waiting for anyone. His voice on the radio came more than once, soft, questioning, uncertain. Should I pit? Not once. Not twice. But repeatedly. Every moment he delayed, the track changed shape beneath him. Every moment he hesitated, Hamilton extended his rhythm. The difference wasn't technical. It was psychological. Ferrari didn't fail Leclerc by refusing him a tire change. They failed him by building a system where no one, not even the driver, felt empowered to seize the moment. By the time the decision was made, the moment had already passed. The rain had shifted the game, and Leclerc was playing catch-up in a race that no longer matched the script he'd been given. What Hamilton did wasn't just strategy. It was poetry in motion. It was composed in the chaos of Istanbul 2020, refined in the downpour of Fuji, perfected in the madness of Hockenheim. It was the kind of vision that can't be taught, can't be programmed, can't be modeled. It only comes to those who trust the storm, who run toward it, who recognize that unpredictability isn't an obstacle, it's an opportunity. He didn't just survive the shift. He defined it. While others clung to analytics, he leaned into intuition. While teams processed rainfall percentages and tire delta graphs, Hamilton recalibrated in real time. Not in a garage full of engineers, but alone, inside the cockpit, at 300 km/h, with raindrops crawling across his visor. That level of mental speed, of inner certainty, is what separates the great from the eternal. Leclerc, for all his talent, lost that race not to Hamilton's pace, but to Hamilton's presence. To Hamilton's ability to hear the race when it goes silent. To his ability to move when others freeze. That moment on lap 13 didn't come with fireworks. It didn't come with fanfare. But it rewrote the entire shape of the Grand Prix. And that's the thing about the greatest drivers in history. They don't just win battles. They erase them before anyone else knows they started. Hamilton didn't beat Leclerc in a corner. He beat him in a breath. In a blink. In a choice made before the world was ready. Because when others look for strategy, Lewis becomes it. When others wait for clarity, he is the clarity. When others search for control, he already has it. And when the storm arrives, he doesn't back down. He becomes the eye of it. While Charles Leclerc operated the same machinery, accessed the same downforce profile, engaged the same suspension dynamics, and relied on identical telemetry-guided decisions as his teammate, he was unable to extract clarity from chaos. The blueprint was identical. The steering wheel identical. The compound choices identical. But the outcome, fundamentally and undeniably, was not. What emerged over the course of that tense, rain-soaked weekend at Silverstone wasn't merely a difference in raw lap time, nor was it just a disparity in driving lines or tire management. What surfaced, slowly, brutally, and irrevocably, was something far deeper, a gap in command presence, a chasm in psychological clarity, and a missing element of battlefield leadership. While the car itself was armed with cutting-edge engineering and decades of accumulated data, it still required a driver with the nerve, the intuition, and the mental bandwidth to weaponize it under fire. And Hamilton, without shouting, without posturing, without theatrics, demonstrated that rare ability in its purest form. Leclerc, undeniably fast, outrageously gifted, and respected by nearly every engineer who's ever worked with him, became trapped within a cycle of hesitation. His radio transmissions were not sharpened tools but uncertain feelers, half-formed questions in a storm that demanded immediate answers. How's the rain moving? Are we sure about this compound? I'm not feeling the grip. None of these were unreasonable inquiries, but they painted a picture of a driver looking outward for solutions, waiting for the race to settle, rather than seizing it. His feedback lacked finality. It lacked conviction. It came from a place of confusion rather than command. That is not a weakness of character. It is a reflection of the crucible of leadership, a role Leclerc is still growing into, and which, in this moment, Hamilton seized with both hands. In contrast, Hamilton's radio messages had an entirely different cadence, a tone sharpened by years of experience, not just in winning but in suffering, adapting, and overcoming. His communication wasn't loud, it was anchored. One line in particular, delivered calmly amid mounting spray and intensifying grip fluctuations, cut through everything like a blade. Tell me when the window opens. I'll manage. There was no panic, no second guessing. It wasn't a request for reassurance. It was a declaration of operational readiness. It said, I know where I am. I know what I have. I know what to do. Just give me the trigger, and I'll do the rest. It wasn't swagger. It wasn't theater. It was the voice of a driver completely in tune with his machine, his crew, the conditions, and most importantly himself. That sentence didn't just land in the engineers' ears, it reverberated through their confidence. In motorsport, data drives decisions, but trust drives instinct. And when Hamilton speaks like that, the pit wall doesn't just hear him, they believe him. They shift their eyes from screens to real-world execution. They let go of hesitation and follow his lead. Because when you have a driver who sees more than the dashboard, who feels more than the sensors can report, and who commits without fear, you let him lead. Not because hierarchy demands it, but because logic surrenders to experience. Leclerc had the car. He had the setup. He had the opportunity. But he didn't have the grip, not the physical grip on the tarmac, but the psychological grip over the moment. That's what Silverstone revealed. Not that Leclerc is flawed, but that Hamilton is fully formed. That when the clouds gather and every variable becomes unpredictable, Lewis doesn't just endure, he commands. He doesn't adapt after the storm, he drives into it, steering with intention, reshaping the race with instinct and muscle memory cultivated over hundreds of Grand Prix battles. Leclerc's hesitance was subtle but cumulative. The engineers noticed the pattern. The leadership saw the body language. The performance delta wasn't about straight-line speed, it was about emotional posture. Charles wanted information. Lewis was information. Charles asked what to do next. Lewis told them what was coming. That distinction, almost invisible at first, became louder with every lap, every decision point, every tire call. It showed in the lap times. It showed in the tire wear. It showed in the final result, but more than that, it showed in the debrief room, where eye contact, silence, and tone often speak louder than any chart or graph. There's a reason why, in the history of Formula One, some drivers become more than just winners, they become anchors. People you build around. Not because they're invincible, but because when everything breaks down, they remain whole. Hamilton has become that figure, not through personality cult or branding, but through unwavering execution in the most volatile conditions. Silverstone didn't prove that he was faster. It proved he was firmer, more grounded, more attuned to the chaos, not as something to fear, but as something to use. In a sport where the fastest driver doesn't always win, where outcomes are determined by milliseconds, split decisions, and whether that changes mid-sector, certainty is the rarest commodity. Certainty in self. Certainty in vision. Certainty in how to wield 1,000 horsepower with surgical precision on a track that offers no forgiveness. And that's what Hamilton brought to Silverstone, an almost unnatural calm in the heart of a swirling storm. Not because he wasn't challenged, but because he knew how to challenge the challenge. So while Leclerc questioned, Hamilton declared. While Charles waited for grip, Hamilton created it. While one man tried to find the rhythm, the other set it. It wasn't just the difference between two drivers, it was the difference between reaction and command, between potential and presence, between a fast driver and a leader. Because in Formula One, trust is the oxygen of progress. And it isn't handed out. It's earned, lap by lap, word by word, decision by decision. And when Hamilton said, "Tell me when the window opens. I'll manage," it wasn't just a moment of confidence. It was the purest expression of elite execution, born from years of surviving pressure, redefining expectations, and mastering the most brutal playing field in motorsport. It was the line that will echo in every meeting, every strategy session, and every moment of doubt inside Ferrari. Because that's what real leaders do. They don't ask for the moment. They become it. Every movement Lewis Hamilton made during the British Grand Prix wasn't reactive, rushed, or desperate. It was deliberate. It was orchestrated. It was like watching a master chess player dismantle his opponent, not by responding to threats, but by predicting them, setting traps 5 corners ahead, and capitalizing on moments before anyone else even saw them coming. There was nothing random about it. No panic. No wasted motion. His steering inputs were subtle but decisive. His throttle control was tuned to perfection. His overtakes were not just well-timed, they were inevitable. Drivers like Tsunoda and Stroll, who put up stubborn fights against Leclerc, were mere stepping stones for Hamilton. Where Charles hesitated, Lewis advanced. Where Charles braked too late and ran wide, Hamilton hugged the apex and disappeared into the distance. It wasn't just driving, it was domination delivered with surgical calm. While Leclerc wrestled with understeer, questioned grip, and visibly fought the SF-25 through nearly every high-speed transition, Hamilton seemed to unlock a different version of the same machine. His Ferrari wasn't skittish. It wasn't unpredictable. It looked obedient. Almost as if the car itself knew who was in control. Charles, under pressure, began making mistakes, not monumental ones, but the kind that stack up and destroy rhythm. Small lockups. Poor exits. Nervous corrections. He started fighting not just the conditions, but himself. Meanwhile, Hamilton was flowing, adapting, exploiting every hint of moisture and reading every inch of asphalt like a language only he could understand. And when the checkered flag finally fell, the damage was already done. Leclerc wasn't just behind in position. He was behind in narrative. Behind in leadership. Behind in belief. His post-race interview was telling, not for what he said, but for what he couldn't say. There was no clear explanation. No concrete excuse. He mumbled about spray. About balance issues. About an elusive setup window that had mysteriously moved during the race. But the silence behind his eyes said everything. He knew. Everyone knew. The same car had produced 2 very different performances, and only one had risen above the chaos to own the race. The other had merely endured it. Inside the Ferrari garage, there was no shouting, no accusations, no fiery meetings. But the energy had shifted. You could feel it, subtle, tense, heavy with unspoken clarity. No one needed to say out loud what had just happened. They'd seen the data. They'd watched the replay. They'd listened to the radio messages. One driver had turned adversity into momentum. The other had turned it into excuses. And that contrast, so sharp, so unavoidable, changed everything. Because Formula One, for all its data points and engineering, is still a human sport. Leadership isn't a stat. It's a force. And in those crucial moments, Hamilton didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand. He didn't politic. He just drove with such conviction, with such relentless control, that the team naturally began to orbit around him. Not because they were told to, but because he commanded it through performance. There was no need for power plays or behind-the-scenes battles. The authority was earned, authored, stamped. And Leclerc, despite 5 seasons in red and countless hours representing the Scuderia, still carried the posture of someone asking for permission to lead rather than taking ownership of the opportunity. What happened at Silverstone was more than a lesson in wet racing lines or tire preservation. It was a study in power. Not horsepower, real power. Influence. Trust. Gravitas. The invisible gravity that decides who gets listened to first in meetings, who the engineers build setups around, who receives early access to upgrade paths, and whose word carries more weight when development direction is debated. It's not in contracts, it's in moments like this. Going into the weekend, Ferrari's ambitions were already tempered. Everyone in red knew Red Bull was too far gone to realistically challenge this season. Podiums, maybe. Wins in mixed conditions, perhaps. But the real battle wasn't external. It wasn't against Verstappen or Norris. It was internal. It was subtle but seismic. A battle for identity. For vision. For leadership in the era that's rapidly approaching. With the 2026 regulation reset looming like a tidal wave, Ferrari isn't just fighting to climb up the grid, they're fighting to decide who's going to steer the entire project. On paper, Leclerc had the edge. More points. More podiums. Longer tenure. Closer ties to the team emotionally. He's been with Ferrari through the highs and the heartbreaks. He's carried the burden of expectation through every rebuild, every technical overhaul, every false dawn. But statistics can be misleading. Because leadership isn't cumulative. It's not based on seniority. It's based on presence. And at Silverstone, Hamilton brought something Leclerc didn't: clarity. Certainty. Control under maximum stress. His drive to 4th place wasn't about salvaging points. It was a strategic, almost philosophical repositioning. It was a redefining moment. A declaration that while the championship standings may belong to others this year, the future of Ferrari is being quietly sculpted by the man who delivered one of the most psychologically dominant 4th-place finishes in recent memory. It wasn't about the trophy. It was about what that drive meant. Because in F1, the car is only part of the weapon. The driver is the other. And Ferrari now knows which one of their drivers can transform adversity into opportunity, who can extract not just lap time, but belief from a team, who can turn pressure into fuel rather than fear. Hamilton didn't walk away from Silverstone with a win. He didn't need one. What he walked away with was something far more valuable: control of the narrative, the trust of his engineers, the silent backing of the garage, the increasing attention of the higher-ups who are already thinking in timelines that stretch beyond 2025. While Leclerc spoke about car balance and spray visibility, Hamilton let the stopwatch do the talking. And in a sport where time is truth, he told the most compelling story of the weekend. And now, Ferrari finds itself staring at a choice it didn't expect to face so soon. One driver represents the familiar, the loyal, the invested. The other represents evolution, experience, a higher ceiling when it matters most. And in a sport that punishes indecision, that kind of clarity is impossible to ignore. Because Formula One is not just about who gets pole. It's about who shifts the center of gravity inside a team, who turns silence into direction. And after Silverstone, that center is no longer where it used to be. It's orbiting Hamilton, and it's moving fast. And something is shifting, subtly, silently, but unmistakably. Beneath the surface of Ferrari's polished PR statements and behind the confident faces shown in press conferences, there's a tremor reverberating through the heart of Maranello. In the debrief rooms where words are measured and tensions hang thick in the air, in the simulator bays where millimeters of steering angle and millisecond throttle traces are studied like sacred scripture, and in the relentless flow of post-race data where emotion holds no weight and only numbers speak, a new truth, uncomfortable for some, inevitable for others, is beginning to take shape. Engineers don't say it outright. Strategists avoid eye contact when it comes up. Team principals choose silence over confrontation. But no one can deny it anymore. Lewis Hamilton, in the final 30 laps of Silverstone 2025, gained a staggering 17.8 seconds on his own teammate. That's not a typo. Nearly 18 seconds. Same car. Same tires. Same strategy. Same levels of downforce. Identical machinery. Identical weather, identical opportunity. But only one of them turned that into something extraordinary. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't luck. It was surgical driving, refined decision-making, world-class tire preservation, micro-adjustments in braking, a level of foresight in changing grip conditions that bordered on clairvoyant. Lap after lap, Hamilton didn't just inch forward. He expanded the gap with a sense of inevitability that turned curiosity into disbelief. He didn't just pull away from Charles Leclerc, he dismantled the idea that the two were operating on the same competitive plane that day. And now that gap, the one no one dares mention directly, has become the elephant in every engineering room. It's the silence that fills corridors in Fiorano. It's the question hanging in the air during Monday's technical briefing. It's the thought every data analyst has processed, and every department head has filed under to be discussed later. But later is arriving faster than expected. Because this wasn't just any race. It didn't decide a world championship. There were no decisive overtakes for the title. No final lap fireworks. But it did decide something even more vital within the power structure of Scuderia Ferrari: status. In a team like Ferrari, where history weighs more than silverware and where politics run deeper than paint, status isn't given, it's earned under fire. It's forged in weekends like Silverstone, where chaos reigns and excuses evaporate. The stopwatch may show only seconds, but behind those digits lies something far more profound: authority, command, influence, legacy. Hamilton didn't just outperform Leclerc, he outshone him in the eyes that matter most, those building Ferrari's future. And that's where the conversations, quiet now but gaining traction with each lap replayed and each heat map analyzed, begin to pick up weight. Who is the true nucleus of this team? Who has the mental stability under pressure? Who sees through fog when everyone else is blinded? Who builds momentum from disorder? Ferrari has always been torn between romance and ruthlessness. They love their golden boys. They adore narratives. They cherish emotional investments. But when the dust settles, they follow performance. Always. Because the red team doesn't survive on loyalty, it survives on victory. And victory requires choosing the right cornerstone to build upon. Max Verstappen, somewhere ahead, continues his merciless domination. So far in the distance he's practically racing in another category. McLaren, meanwhile, continues their ferocious climb back to relevance with Norris and Piastri gnawing at every podium opportunity. But Ferrari's true battle is no longer with rivals in orange or blue. The real storm is internal. The seismic confrontation isn't happening on the grid, it's unfolding inside the walls of Maranello. This isn't about which driver can extract more in qualifying. This isn't about one-lap fireworks or box office charisma. This is about long-term identity. Who represents the future of Ferrari? Who do you trust when everything collapses? On one side stands Leclerc, the chosen one for years. The boy who was meant to become a man in red. His story is romantic, emotional, born of tragedy and talent, raised through the Ferrari Driver Academy, and sculpted into the face of a generation. He's had the speed. He's delivered magic. He's bled red since day one. But even fairy tales must survive scrutiny. And under that scrutiny, in the most critical, unstable, unpredictable conditions of the season so far, he didn't rise. He stalled. On the other side stands Hamilton, a mercenary in the eyes of some, a mentor in the eyes of others, but now, increasingly, something far more potent. A pillar. A stabilizer. A vision. Not just a man who races the car, but one who commands the room, interprets the conditions, leads the operations, and elevates every component of the team just by his presence. What he showed at Silverstone wasn't just driving. It was structure under pressure. A glimpse of what Ferrari could be if they surrendered nostalgia and embraced evolution. This is no longer about driver preference. It's about direction. It's about defining who Ferrari wants to be in the next era of Formula One. And right now, that 18-second delta isn't just a number, it's a mirror. A brutal, inescapable reflection of what happens when experience meets execution. When pressure meets poise. When expectation meets action. Inside the simulation bays, the conversations are shifting tone. Setup feedback is being re-evaluated. Driver debriefs are being compared with sharper scrutiny. And those tasked with building the 2026 car, the new chassis, the new aerodynamics, the power unit layout, the cockpit ergonomics, the development priorities, they're no longer looking at the names on the garage doors. They're looking at the data, the inputs, the outputs, the delta. And one voice is starting to shape their decisions more than the other. Ferrari doesn't make decisions lightly. They carry their legacy like a crown of fire. But they've made ruthless choices before. Dropped champions. Backed outsiders. Sacrificed sentiment for supremacy. And this time, they may be heading toward a crossroads far sooner than anyone expected. Because when the rain fell and the plan disintegrated, only one man created clarity. Only one driver elevated not just himself, but the entire operation. And that changes everything. The answer isn't clear yet, not officially. But the balance of power is tilting. Slowly. Uneasily. Irrefutably. And every lap, every sector, every race from now on will feed that shift. Silverstone 2025 didn't decide the title. But it did begin the reshaping of Ferrari's future. Not with declarations. Not with headlines. But with nearly 18 seconds of silence that spoke louder than anything ever could. Every once in a generation, a Formula One driver reaches a rare threshold, not just of skill but of transcendence, where their performance no longer depends on the machinery beneath them. Where they cease to simply drive the car and begin to embody it. Where the boundary between man and machine dissolves under pressure so intense that it would normally fracture even the most hardened competitors. Michael Schumacher reached that state of metaphysical mastery during the torrential Spanish Grand Prix in 1996, where he defied the conditions and delivered a performance so sublime it altered the perception of what was humanly possible behind the wheel. Ayrton Senna summoned something nearly spiritual at Donington Park in 1993, dancing through a wet circuit with an intuitive grace that made the impossible look effortless. And now in 2025, Lewis Hamilton may have written his own chapter in that sacred lineage, not because of a victory on paper, but because of the symphony he conducted amid chaos, at his home Grand Prix, in front of a sea of hearts that have followed him from his first karting days to the ultimate theater of Silverstone. What unfolded that weekend wasn't merely a strong result, or a flash of brilliance, or a nostalgic comeback moment for the seven-time champion. It was something else entirely. It was the redefinition of control under fire. The reassertion of calm when panic was beginning to whisper through the paddock. The precise unraveling of a mystery that only the very few can solve, how to command absolute clarity in the middle of absolute disorder. As the skies collapsed and rain tore into every strategy, and as data streams began offering noise instead of answers, Hamilton didn't react like a man trying to survive. He moved like an artist at work, like a maestro conducting a silent orchestra that only he could hear. While others blinked, hesitated, doubted, and overthought, Hamilton sliced through the uncertainty with surgical intent. It wasn't about theatrics. He didn't gesture wildly in the cockpit. He didn't yell over the radio. There were no tantrums, no desperation, no frustration. Just the unrelenting discipline of someone who has seen this chaos before and who refuses to flinch. This was no emotional outburst or desperate lunge for legacy. This was control at its purest. Calculated. Composed. Ruthless. He drove not like someone chasing victory, but like someone setting the terms of engagement, for his team, for the conditions, for the sport itself. And that's why Silverstone 2025 will not be remembered for champagne or celebration. It will be remembered for tone, for the shift in energy that followed Hamilton's drive. For the way Ferrari engineers, mechanics, and leadership looked at one another afterward, not with confusion or frustration, but with silent recognition that something had changed. For the first time in years, Ferrari didn't walk away from a storm wondering what went wrong. They walked away knowing who had just shown them what right looked like. That clarity, rare, hard-earned, and unmistakable, cut through the fog of their recent history like a scalpel. Because Ferrari has known brilliance before. They've seen their drivers survive hellish conditions. They've watched champions emerge victorious from mechanical failures, strategic disasters, and pressure cookers of expectation. But what happened at Silverstone wasn't just about endurance. It was about orchestration. Ferrari didn't watch Hamilton endure a storm. They watched him own it, read it like a book, bend it to his will, and carve through it with such poise that it felt as though he had written the weather himself. And perhaps even more telling than Hamilton's mastery was what unraveled on the other side of the garage. Charles Leclerc, so often the symbol of Ferrari's potential, once again echoed the script of recent years. Flashes of brilliance undermined by hesitation, by miscommunication, by indecision in the face of rapidly evolving threats. It was a performance not of failure, but of disconnection. Of not yet reaching the level where instinct overtakes instruction. The contrast was as painful as it was revealing. Where Hamilton created order out of chaos, Leclerc slipped into the very same shadows that have haunted Ferrari since 2022, moments of promise fading under pressure, critical laps lost in translation between gut feeling and engineering feedback. Ferrari doesn't declare favorites. It never has. It doesn't anoint saviors through branding or social media campaigns. It follows strength. It aligns behind vision. It gravitates toward clarity when the world goes blurry. That's what Schumacher offered them, and that's what Hamilton is now delivering. Not through noise, not through PR, but through relentless execution and the kind of lap-by-lap leadership that doesn't demand trust, it demands obedience. Not because of ego, but because it leaves no room for doubt. In the end, Silverstone wasn't about a result printed in bold on a timing sheet. It wasn't about where Hamilton finished, or how many points he took home. It was about the unshakable signal he sent to the team, to the sport, and to anyone watching with the eyes to see it. When the storm breaks, when the data dies, when strategies crumble and confusion creeps in, he is the anchor. The axis. The constant in a sea of variables. And that message didn't need volume. It didn't require screaming or spectacle. Because in Formula One, the most powerful moments in history often arrive without fireworks. They don't roar through the paddock. They slip quietly into the bloodstream of a team, a fanbase, a sport. They move like whispers, lap after lap, corner after corner, gear after gear, until suddenly, everything is different. Until suddenly, everyone realizes that they've stopped listening to the weather, to the wind, to the whispers of doubt. They're listening to him.